With respect to alien enemies, no doubt has been intimated as to the federal authority over them. That was James Madison referring to the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 as totally constitutional. So on this episode, you're going to learn what the act is, Madison's explanation for why it's constitutional, and maybe more important for us today, how narrow it actually is in practice. But first of all, welcome, and thank you for joining me here on the Path to Liberty. My name is Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for Wednesday, March 19th, 2025. So let's start out with the text of the act itself, signed into law by President John Adams, July 6th, 1798, an act respecting alien enemies. Key terms here, we'll get to that in a moment. Whenever there shall be a declared war between the United States and any foreign nation or government, or any invasion or predatory incursion shall be perpetrated, attempted, or threatened against the territory of the United States by any foreign nation or government, and the President of the United States shall make public proclamation of the event, well then, here's the result. All natives, citizens, denizens, or subjects of the hostile nation or government, being males of the age of 14 years and upwards, who shall be within the United States and not actually naturalized, shall be liable to be apprehended, restrained, secured, and removed as alien enemies. And with this, plus some of the process that's explained throughout the act, we actually get 4 key points about the Alien Enemies Act. First of all, when all the requirements of the act are met, which is the primary thing that I just read here, this is 100% the president's call. There's no interference from Congress or the judiciary. It's totally the call of the executive branch. 2, it only applies during a declared war or a perpetrated, attempted, or threatened invasion or predatory incursion against the territory of the United States, and that war, invasion, or predatory incursion must be done by a foreign government or nation. And then 4, it was actually amended in 1918 to remove the gender restriction. So it doesn't just apply to males of the age of 14 years and upwards. It also includes females. Now, James Madison addressed this not only in the Virginia resolutions of 1798, but he explained it in detail in his report of 1800. And this was part of the 4 laws known as the Alien and Sedition Acts, signed that summer of 1798 by John Adams. And this is the one, the Alien Enemies Act, is the one that pretty much everyone saw as constitutional, including Jefferson and Madison, who drafted the resolutions calling for nullification of the other 3 acts. So Madison, first of all here, emphasized a really important distinction. He said much confusion and fallacy have been thrown into the question by blending the 2 cases of aliens, members of a hostile nation, and aliens, members of friendly nations. These 2 cases, wrote Madison, are so obviously and so essentially distinct that it occasions no little surprise that the distinction should have been disregarded. And Madison here was just clearly separating aliens from nations basically actively at war or invading or a predatory incursion. We'll just call it war for the rest of this episode. Actively at war with the United States and those that are not. And Chief Justice John Jay, a few years earlier, made the same point. He said, "The question arising on this plea is whether, admitting the facts pled to be true, the King of Great Britain hath become the enemy of the United States. In that sense, which would justify the court in considering his subjects as being alien enemies, and consequently incapable of maintaining actions in our courts." So one of the results of being an alien enemy, if another sovereign is an enemy of the United States, is they can't even have any action in any of the courts. And Jay said, there is a wide distinction between a power who is unfriendly and inimical to and a power actually at war with the United States, and they with him. Now, Madison, along with John Jay and so many others, they were, of course, deeply, deeply familiar with the law of nations and the key legal scholars of the era, people like Blackstone and Vattel. Here from Blackstone's commentaries, I believe this is Book 1, Chapter 10, of the people, whether aliens, denizens, or natives. Blackstone writes, when I mentioned these rights of an alien, because he went through this whole process of talking about how an alien can acquire property, etc., I must be understood of alien friends only, or such whose countries are in peace with ours. For alien enemies have no rights, no privileges, unless by the king's special favor during the time of war. Now, he can't be an alien enemy unless it's a time of war, but if it's during a time of war and you are an alien enemy, the only way you get any rights or privileges is if the king says, well, yeah, I'm giving you a special favor. And here from Vattel in the Law of Nations, published in 1758, Book 3, Chapter 5, he points out that the enemy is he with whom a nation is at open war. But he continues, when the sovereign or ruler of the state declares war against another sovereign, it is understood that the whole nation declares war against another nation. For the sovereign represents the nation and acts in the name of the whole society. And what's the result of that? Vattel said, hence, these two nations are enemies, and all the subjects of the one are enemies to all the subjects of the other. In this particular, custom and principle are in accord. Now, these were well-established legal principles to the founding generation, to the old revolutionaries, and they tell us why James Madison, because he widely understood this stuff, considered alien enemies as a separate legal category, and he explicitly underscored this principle as well. He said, with respect to alien enemies, no doubt has been intimated as to the federal authority over them. This is the father of the Constitution saying, well, if you're an alien enemy, of course, this is this federal power over you and how we're expressing this in this act. He said, the Constitution having expressly delegated to Congress the power to declare war against any nation, and of course, to treat it and all its members as enemies. So he's just reiterating what Vattel put in the Law of Nations, that once you are in a declared war with another nation, all of the members, all of the subjects, the citizens of the other nations are considered alien enemies if they are within your territory. And Madison understood that wartime apprehensions and removals were actually part of the Law of Nations. Again, that's from Vattel. And it's, if you think about it, this is an essential part of self-defense. If you can't defend yourself or decide whether or not enemies are going to be in your territory during a state of war, you can't defend yourself. Madison said alien enemies are under the Law of Nations and liable to be punished for offenses against it. Alien friends, except in the single case of public ministers, are under the municipal law and must be tried and punished according to that law only. And this is an important distinction. Madison explained, just as Vattel and Blackstone and other writers did, that alien friends get due process under domestic law. Alien enemies do not get due process, period. Now, I know these terms, alien enemies and alien friends, tend to get people a little tripped up. When we say alien friends, this is a legal term from back in the 18th century to refer to aliens from countries that you're not at war with, that are not invading or doing a predatory incursion against you. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're your buddy and you're going to invite them over for dinner or to watch the game or something like that. And John Jay discussed this as well. He said there is also a wide distinction between the existence of causes which would justify a war and the existence of actual war in consequence of them. Whatever causes or reasons there may be to justify war, yet these causes and reasons must remain and be considered as mere inducements until the power vested with the right to make war shall think proper, by declaration or deeds, to cause a state of war to exist. And James Madison, in his report of 1800, felt so strongly about this that he reiterated it. Here he is writing, "The general practice of nations distinguishes between alien friends and alien enemies. The latter, that is, alien enemies, it has proceeded against according to the law of nations by expelling them as enemies." So this was a practice that has been done for ages. Expel them as enemies because it's dangerous to keep potential enemies and members of an enemy nation at home where they can do all kinds of crazy damage. The former, alien friends, it is considered as under a local and temporary allegiance and entitled to a correspondent protection. Now, Madison then gave another example to further explain this difference. He said offenses for, and it's important to understand, again, the term alien friends doesn't mean that they're always awesome, because if you're thinking about offenses and punishments and dealing with municipal law, alien friends aren't necessarily your best buddy because they may be doing things that they need to go to prison for. Offenses for which aliens within the jurisdiction of a country are punishable are first, offenses committed by the nation of which they make a part, and in whose offenses they are involved. Secondly, offenses committed by themselves alone, without any charge against the nation to which they belong. The first case, Madison writes, is alien enemies. The second is alien friends. And just to reiterate, alien friends aren't always actually friendly in the modern sense of the term. Otherwise, this discussion about punishment and offenses wouldn't even be happening. And so he's just making clear that the only way to punish an enemy nation is through war and kicking out the subjects, the citizens, the denizens of that nation is part of the law of nations, the law of war. And he says it like this. In the first case, the offending nation can no otherwise be punished than by war, one of the laws of which authorizes the expulsion of such its members, as may be found within the country against which the offense has been committed. Now, Madison also included a really important caveat here, being preemptive, reading it really broadly to prevent a war, prevent an invasion that might happen at some point in the future, does not qualify as constitutional under this act. He said, nor can it ever be granted that a power to act on a case when it actually occurs includes a power over all the means that may tend to prevent the occurrence of the case. Such a latitude of construction would render unavailing every practicable definition of particular and limited powers. And if you understand James Madison speaking in the context of the Constitution here, he's the guy who wrote in Federalist 45 that the federal government would be one of few and defined powers. And if you give them the latitude of construction to read it as broadly as they want, in any way they want, they're going to do all kinds of stuff, and it won't be a government of particular and limited powers, delegated powers, 10th Amendment guy, of course. And he continued, under the idea of explaining how this would play out if you gave it the broad reading, under the idea of preventing war in general, as well as invasion in particular, not only an indiscriminate removal of all aliens, including alien friends, not just ones who are deemed alien enemies. Indiscriminate means not following the municipal laws he mentioned here. It might happen, but 1,000 other things, because as soon as you give them power to do one thing in one area, they're going to read everything else really broadly as well. He said, but 1,000 other things still more remote from the operations and precautions pertinent to war might take place. And that is a tough sentence to read. So he's just warning about don't even consider reading this as broadly as, well, some people might want to read it. And James Madison was really clear, really, really emphatic about this. The Alien Enemies Act of 1798 was totally constitutional. It's part of the law of nations, the laws of war. And on the other hand, he went into some detail about that other one. An act concerning aliens which covered removals for alien friends, and he explained why he saw that as totally unconstitutional. And Thomas Jefferson actually took the same position as Madison. The Kentucky Resolutions of 1798, which if you're familiar with the work of the TAC, you've heard about this many times. Jefferson called for nullification of the hated Alien and Sedition Acts in 1798, but did not include, specifically, he did not include in the Kentucky resolutions the Alien Enemies Act because he saw it as constitutional. And when he was president, he refused to implement the other parts of the Alien and Sedition Acts. And when they were up for renewal, he just urged Congress to let them expire. And they certainly did that, except for the Alien Enemies Act. And so to reiterate, let me pull it up here on the screen one more time so you can check it out. The Alien Enemies Act cannot be used unless it's during a war declared by the United States against a foreign nation or government, or if a foreign nation or government perpetrates, attempts, or threatens invasion or predatory incursion. Basically, all acts of war. And because this is so closely tied to acts of war and a declaration of war, it's really, really important to understand what the Constitution means by declare war. I covered that in a lot of detail in an episode just this week. The declare war lie, what the founders and Constitution really said. This, plus all these other source documents, will be included in a blog post for this episode over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. And like pretty much everything else under the Constitution, most people that I see either talking or posting about this topic get it totally wrong, or at best, partially right. And that's part of why we work so hard every single day here at the 10th Amendment Center to reach and teach more and more people about this essential history from the founders, about the Constitution, about the principles of liberty, about the Revolution, and so much more. And nothing helps us do this work more than the financial faith and support of our members. If you got a couple of bucks of that dirty government fiat that they're quickly devaluing day in and day out, year in and year out, our membership program starts out at just $2 a month over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. We also have annual, 5-year, and lifetime options. Or if for whatever reason you don't want to be a member but still want to help us out, that's super cool. You can make a one-time contribution over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/donate. Or if you're already a member, which is even more cool, and want to help us out, I'd be very grateful for any consideration give. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/donate. I won't belabor that point. There's also a number of free and easy peasy things that you can do. Oh, I should mention, I'm not going to have a show on Friday. I've got a few things going on. Alan's heading out of town to hang out with the Harrys. Hopefully I'm not doxing him too much there, but so Alan won't be around, but we'll be back for the show on Monday. I also wanted to point out these few easy peasy things that you can do to help us spread the word, like hitting the like button, leaving reviews on Apple Podcasts, subscribe, get notifications. Watch time percentage on YouTube is a big thing. So if you watch it for 50%, that's cool. 80% better, 100% better, 150% really, really great. That tends to tell the algorithm that you're super interested in it, and they should show it to more people. And I appreciate all the help that so many of you have been giving us in spreading the word. Again, I really appreciate you spending some of your time with me today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope it was interesting, but more important than anything, I hope it made you think, and I hope you learned something. I look forward to seeing you next week here on the Path to Liberty.